Last week, just before July 4th, former senior FBI special agent Michael Feinberg said he was leaving the agency. And the circumstances just might make your jaw drop. It made my jaw drop when I read the piece. In a piece for Lawfare, he wrote about his departure, saying that at the end of May, he lost out on a promotion after a direct order from FBI Deputy Director Dan Bongino. Feinberg wrote in his piece, "I'd made a terrible mistake. I'd remained friends with someone who had appeared on Kash Patel's enemies list." He went on to say, "Was I accused of any sort of misconduct? No. Didn't matter. I faced a choice. Get demoted or resign." Feinberg's personal friend, Peter Strzok, was a Trump target. So Feinberg was punished at work and had his job taken away because of who he hung out with, outside of work. The two briefly worked together about a decade ago, and Feinberg said his friendship with Strzok began with a discovery that we liked the same bands and shared an interest in trying new restaurants. If the fact that I sang along to Every Day is Like Sunday while he stood next to me at a Morrissey concert actually represents an imminent danger to the Bureau's integrity, Feinberg wrote, then for the first time in nearly half a century on this earth, I'm truly at a loss for words. Feinberg had been serving his country in a senior role at the agency as the acting head of the FBI field office in Norfolk, Virginia. He played major roles in operations against threats posed by the Chinese government, apolitical work, which is what FBI agents do, on cases against Chinese conglomerates like Huawei and China Mobile. This was work Republicans in Washington loved, should have loved. Everybody should have loved it. And Feinberg would tell you he's generally been closer to them politically anyway. He writes in his piece, "Far from being some sort of leftist deep state operative, my personal beliefs generally lean right. I was vice president of my law school's most conservative organization, and my first clerkship was with a libertarian public interest firm." Feinberg wrote that, of course, in his piece. And our country is losing out on his service. A 15-year FBI veteran who Trump cronies sent packing, seemingly because of who he goes to concerts with after he leaves work for the day. Former senior FBI special agent Michael Feinberg joins me now. You wrote an incredibly compelling piece I encourage everyone to read. I just read some parts from your essay, but what else do you want people to know about the circumstances under which you left the FBI and what do you think it means?
The circumstances which drove me from the FBI, which is an organization I dearly love still, and to whose workforce and mission I feel an immense sense of loyalty, the reason the story matters is because it is sort of a shorthand that people can understand that demonstrates how under Patel and Bongino, senior FBI leadership is willing to jettison experience and subject matter expertise in the name of ideological purity or political uniformity. And when you lose that much experience, when you lose that much subject matter expertise, the country, by definition, becomes less safe because there are less people who understand terrorist organizations or foreign intelligence services.
That's such an important part of this. And I saw you talk about this a little bit earlier today. I mean, the resources even within the FBI are not unlimited in that, you know, the resources go to different places. If they go, say, toward immigration enforcement, then they don't go to other places. Talk to me a little bit about what that means. We're at a time where there's rising political violence and threats. There are still, there's domestic terrorism is something the FBI obviously focuses on. What should people understand about what that means to have resources moved, to have people with extensive expertise pushed out of the Bureau?
So it means a couple of different things. The first is investigative resources in the Bureau, regardless of whether the current leadership is going to admit this, are a finite resource. They're used very much in a zero-sum fashion. If you have a counterintelligence squad or an international terrorism squad or a public corruption squad that has 10 people and every day 3 of those people are temporarily assigned or some of them are permanently assigned to immigration enforcement duties, then, you know, do the math. The percentage of white collar and public corruption cases or terrorism or counterintelligence cases that are getting done is going to drop significantly. And, you know, national security cases in particular are very long-term projects. Mm-hmm. You can't just drop them off and pick them up later. They oftentimes take months or years to build. And people not being able to staff them on a regular schedule has a material effect on their outcome.
You also talked in your piece. I mean, you were inside the agency for much of the Patel Bongino era so far, of course, until just about a month ago. You said in your piece that people avoided meeting one-on-one to make sure there's an audience for whatever they say, which should be alarming to people. There are so many, I should just reiterate, and you will reiterate this too, so many committed career professionals who are not political at all working inside the FBI. But how does this impact the work they're trying to do and even slowing down the work they're trying to do?
So I hate to leverage a cliche to make my point, but particularly in any work involving intelligence analysis or investigative operations, leaders, particularly at the lower levels, the mid levels, and the levels directly below sort of the government C-suite, they need to be able to speak truth to power. Policies are getting driven on intelligence. Decisions are being made according to facts on the ground, and senior leaders, senior executives need to be able to give those facts without fear to the director and the deputy director. And if we are at a point where very senior members of the FBI are trying to avoid meeting with the deputy director because of a temper which he has often bragged about on his own shows, he's not getting all the information he needs. And he's not getting that information because he's choosing to reflect a certain temperament that is discouraging people from communicating with him.
You waited. I mean, this is incredibly important and insightful for people to hear and understand. This is why it's so rare that people like yourself talk publicly. You waited about a month to do this. Why are you out? Why did you decide to write this piece and kind of come out now?
Honestly, because I was asked to. In the interim between when I left and when the piece was published over the July 4th weekend, a lot of agents reached out to me.
Inside the agency still?
Yes. Some younger agents, some senior executives. There were a couple retirees as well, and there were some complete strangers who got my contact information from mutual friends. And they were alarmed enough at what they had heard happen to me that I was driven out solely because of not a work friendship, that they thought it was important that the rest of the workforce learn what was truly going on. We all knew that very senior officials had been driven out to a regular drumbeat since the day before the inauguration when the deputy director left. Nobody really thought it could get down to a more working level, but it has. I'm not the only one who's been treated this way. I'm just the only one who's going public with it so far.
Michael, I just want to ask you, because we try to remind people of what's normal and what's not, and it's kind of hard in this moment. Are you shocked at all by these criminal investigations into Brennan and Comey, and what do you make of it?
I wish I was more shocked than I actually am. The fact is, as we discussed in the previous segment, the politicization of the senior ranks of FBI leadership that I saw over the past 6 months is considerably more alarming than anything I saw in the previous 15 odd years of my career, or that I'm aware of as a student of U.S. history. So I think there's still a lot of unknowns and a lot of questions that need to be answered about these investigations. I have a little bit of skepticism that they're actually as far along as officials are saying. But, you know, there's a number of questions that Americans should be asking about these before they celebrate them or protest them. There's just a lot of facts that we need to find out that the government needs to explain.
Including what they're even about to begin with. Let me go back to your own case, because it's so powerful that you wrote this and that you're out here explaining to people who are trying to understand what is happening within the government right now. And I'm not sure exactly what the HR policies are inside the FBI, but are you considering any sort of lawsuit against the agency leadership for your demotion or anything along those lines, or you just really want to be out there helping people understand what's happening?
More the latter. And look, I'll be clear. I don't want the rest of my life to be me bemoaning what happened to me at the FBI. I spent a long time working for U.S. national security, and that's really the sort of topics I'd like to focus on as I transition to research and writing. But it is important for the American public to know what's happening at the FBI. And it's important for the FBI workforce to know that some of us who left really do want to still protect them and look out for them. I'm going to be brutally candid here in a way I haven't in any interviews yet. There is a real sense of abandonment and betrayal among the line workforce at so many of the senior executives who've been forced out and have not spoken up about what happened to them.